Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a podcast from PJTN that focuses the light of truth on vital issues in today's headlines that impact every American. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza Moore, founder and president of Proclaiming Justice to the Nations, and I'm here to educate, motivate, and activate you to action. I want to arm you with the truth and the facts you'll need to fight and preserve our constitutional republic and uphold the Judeo-Christian values our nation was founded upon. Welcome to Proclaiming Justice, a PJTN podcast where we shine the light of biblical truth on vital issues from today's headlines that impact every American, Jew and Christian, people of faith and people of conscience. I'm your host, Laurie Cardoza Moore. If you missed the last episode of this podcast, you will find it and our previous podcast lineup on our website at pjtn.org, as well as all the other platforms that you use to access your favorite podcasts. On this week's podcast, I have invited retired Brigadier General Amir Avivi with the Israel Defense and Security Forum. General Avivi is going to update us on the status of a U.S.-Iranian nuclear deal and the threat it poses to America and our only trusted ally and friend in the Middle East, Israel. I also want to remind our audience that it's important for you to listen and share this and all of our previous podcasts with your family and friends so that they can become more informed about this and other related issues that threaten our republic and the state of Israel. So please remember to like and share. General Avivi, thank you so much for joining us on Proclaiming Justice.
Thank you, Laurie. It's a real pleasure to be in this podcast. Thank you.
So let's begin with telling our audience about the Israel Defense and Security Forum and your role within the organization.
So I founded IDSF, Israel's Defense and Security Forum, 3 years ago. It's an organization that is a grassroots movement and also a think tank. And this organization has had huge traction in Israel in 3 years. More than 18,000 Israeli officers, commanders, and operators in reserve and retired joined the organization. And we promote Israel's national security, looking in generations to come. Believing that national security is first and foremost about national values. It's about our deep connection to Judaism, to Zionism, to our land and people. Without spirit, no tank and no airplane can help.
Right.
So we promote the spirit and also educate about the needs to secure Israel for generations to come.
Fantastic. So does the organization also work with other countries, other governments?
Definitely. We work with Washington, with Europe. We educate diplomats here in Israel. And we really share our knowledge and our vast experience talking about everything that has to do with Israel's national security, the region, and what is happening in this region.
Fantastic. So is your organization a nonprofit organization?
Yes, it is. It's a non-profit registered in Israel, and I'm hoping that in the coming year we'll also have a non-profit in the US. But, we receive donations through PEF, and definitely people can support us.
Fantastic. Mm-hmm. That's fantastic. That's good to know, especially for our audience, because our audience is constantly contacting us to ask how they can support Israel. And this is a great and tangible way, especially with regards to Israel's security. It's critically important, as we all know. So let's start, before we talk about what's going on with Iran and the United States, can you update us on Israel's current situation with Hamas in Gaza? We know last month, Israel once again was inundated with missile attacks on the civilian population, while the United States and the UN unfortunately sat by, refusing to confront Hezbollah, Hamas, and of course the terrorist infrastructure in Gaza. Where are we?
So basically, in Gaza, Gaza is controlled by Hamas, and there is also the Palestinian Islamic Jihad. Both organizations in Gaza are fully funded by Iran. They have become Iranian militias, and they are building their forces with tens and millions of dollars that Iran gives these organizations every month.
Mm-hmm.
They have accumulated a huge amount of rockets, tens of thousands of rockets. They're also trying to procure UAVs and build tunnels.
Mm-hmm.
And we've seen in the last few months, due to the political situation in Israel and the demonstrations, a big decrease in our deterrence. And we
Mm-hmm.
started seeing shooting from Gaza and also from the north, with Hamas shooting us with rockets.
Mm-hmm.
And Israel decided to do an attack on Palestinian Islamic Jihad leadership
Mm-hmm.
and infrastructure, and we basically managed to decapitate their whole leadership. And by doing that and by destroying most of their capabilities, we managed to build again Israel's deterrence in the region towards Hamas, towards Hezbollah,
Mm-hmm.
towards Iran. The operation was very sophisticated, very good work between the army and the government.
Mm-hmm.
And at the moment, Gaza is quiet, but Hamas is in full capability and still building its forces as part of the Iranian militias.
So we know, that a truce was called, but how long before the next barrage of attacks is going to take place? And one of the questions I have is, how does Hamas get access? We know that the funding is coming from Iran, but how do they get access to these missiles? I mean, somebody's got to be paying attention to the Mediterranean Sea and what's coming into that area. Somebody's got to be paying attention to the trucks that are bringing supplies into Gaza. How do they secure these missiles?
So it's interesting that when Oslo started in 95, and we retreated from the cities of Gaza, but we were still around them, and we were still inside Gaza with the Jewish towns.
Mm-hmm.
Just by leaving the cities and not operating there anymore, they managed to go from literally the Stone Age to rockets in 6 years. They started producing and shooting rockets at Israel, and this is with Israel still inside the Gaza Strip.
Mm-hmm.
So basically, just by not being active and thwarting buildup of force and attacking where needed inside the cities, this already enables them to build quite a lot of capabilities. But then we did a disengagement. In the disengagement, basically, we took all the Jewish towns out of Gaza and connected Gaza to Egypt. The moment we did that, we boosted this process dramatically. Endless amount of weapons, terrorists, materials are going in and out from Egypt into Gaza, and this is how they are able to build their forces with hundreds and hundreds of tunnels that connect between Egypt and Gaza. And the fact that we have a peace agreement with Egypt is not making any difference at all.
Mm.
The Egyptians are closing their eyes and letting them bring in these capabilities.
So if everybody is turning a blind eye, what about the United Nations? The United Nations surely knows that this is going on. Why do they refuse to address this issue?
So there was a thinking in Israel that if we retreat to international recognized borders, as we did in Gaza,
Mm-hmm.
this will give Israel legitimacy. That if we're shot, we have the right to defend ourselves and stop the shooting and attack. But the fact of the matter is that when we defend ourselves against these rockets, What the international community does, it attacks us, and they want to take us to the international court and accuse us of war atrocities or whatever. So it's amazing to see that no matter what Israel does, at the end of the day, we are the ones being attacked, and we shouldn't ever again give up our basic security needs. What happened in Gaza cannot happen ever in Judea and Samaria, in the heartland of the land of Israel.
Absolutely. It's unfortunate that the land that Gaza was given up by the Israelis when everybody knew Israel would face the same circumstances that they're facing today, because these people are not going to honor any deal. It doesn't matter how much. We all know it doesn't matter how much land is given up. So does your organization, because this is also a very important issue to our followers at PJTN, that they do not agree with giving up any inch of a land, that God made a covenant with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants forever. And part of that covenant was the land, that the land belongs to Israel. And we, as Americans who elect our leaders, hold our leaders accountable and challenge our leaders when they start pushing the idea of Israel, land for peace. There will be no peace if Israel gives up more land. We know this. So, speaking of peace, we also know that the United States is currently discussing an Iranian deal that is going to unfreeze funding that has been frozen. And is this a done deal, General? Is America set on this path of destruction for Israel? Because that's what this means. I mean, under Obama, we had Obama dropping, funds, cash dollars out of airplanes in the middle of the night to fund these, to give to Iran millions of dollars of tax dollars from Americans. And here we have Biden, who it appears he's going to, walk in the same walk the same path that Obama did. And it hasn't helped us. Thank God Trump came in and froze those funds. But, what does this mean for Israel if the U.S. goes through with this? And where is the United States on this? Is this a done deal?
So I don't know if it's done or not, but I know that if it will be, if it will happen, it's terrible, because what will happen is that Iran will get tens of billions of dollars, and this money is going to go to boost the buildup of force that Iran is doing with its proxies, with Hezbollah, with Hamas, with the Houthis in Yemen, and its militias in Iraq. But not only that, it will also boost Russia's capability that is based a lot on Iranian capabilities to fight in Ukraine. And on the other hand, Iran is not going to give anything. It's not going to stop enriching uranium. It's not going to stop its process of moving towards military nuclear capabilities. So basically, the only thing that can happen is that there will be seemingly some kind of agreement, that maybe something to show for the voters in the US looking at the upcoming elections. But the reality on the ground will be devastating for Israel, but not also for Europe. And for the Middle East, when the Sunni world looks at the way the US is behaving, the lack of leadership, the lack of deterrence, they are contemplating more and more to move towards China and towards Russia. The director of the CIA said already in December that there is Russian-Iranian front emerging in the Middle East. The
Mm.
US is losing the Middle East to China and Russia.
Mm. Mm.
So this is not just about Israel. This is about the West. This is about keeping a balance in the globe, and keeping the Western hemisphere interest in the Middle East. The Middle East is the major as the major production of oil. It's the center of world trade. Everything goes through the Middle East. So it's very, very problematic. And looking at Israel, we understand that we need to be able to defend ourselves by ourselves. We understand that in this scenario, we are alone, and we have to be ready to do whatever is needed to defend Israel.
So, General Avivi, can Israel trust America? I mean, I'm sitting here as a U.S. citizen watching what's going on, what's unfolding with our government, and quite honestly, I don't have much faith in the current administration. And you talked about the upcoming elections. Ladies and gentlemen, 2024 are going to be the most important elections in the United States because as it goes with Israel, so it goes with the United States of America. And God is very clear when he told the prophet Obadiah that in the last days he would wipe out the descendants of Edom because they stood by while their brother Jacob or Israel was held in captivity and they did nothing. We as Americans cannot sit back and allow this administration to continue to compromise Israel's status in the Middle East. Israel has a right to defend herself. She has a right to secure her borders. She has a right to deal with the terrorists that come in to try to destroy or attack innocent civilians, destroy the infrastructure in the government. So, General Avivi, do you have hope for this current administration? What's your perspective?
So I think that on the military level, looking at Central Command, looking at the Pentagon, the CIA, I think we are very much aligned. I think that the security apparatus of the US understands the reality on the ground and the need to deal with Iran and stop its nuclear programs. Unfortunately, on the political level, the administration is not doing what it needs to do. And what it needs to do is to build a coalition in the Middle East with Israel and the Sunni world to pose a credible military threat on the Iranian program. The Iranians will listen only to power. They cannot be reasoned.
Mm.
And when they see weakness, they take advantage and move forward with their plans. And unfortunately, we don't see this understanding in the current administration. And I think it's not even about Israel's interest. It's about basic U.S. interests.
Mm-hmm.
And I would expect the U.S. to show leadership and build its deterrence in the Middle East. By the way, it's much better to challenge the weak link in the East, which is Iran, instead of challenging directly China or Russia. So we did the same. When we had to build our deterrence, we attacked the Palestinian Islamic Jihad, which is the weakest organization from all the enemies we have. And through that, we built deterrence. So this is what we suggest for the US. Build your deterrence challenging Iran. This will also affect the ability of Russia to conduct its war in Ukraine. This will encourage Saudi Arabia to sign a peace agreement with Israel that can be extended also to Pakistan and Indonesia and Oman. There is a lot to gain here. Mm-hmm. This will encourage oil production. This will take prices down. Mm-hmm. The other option is leaving Israel alone to deal with Iran. We'll deal with Iran. We can do it, but the consequences will be that there will be a regional war and the whole globe will be affected by that. Every single American will be impacted by a war in the Middle East, talking about oil prices and the routes of commerce and so on. So
Right.
really, the right thing to do is stand with Israel. And you know, anybody who stands with Israel at the end of the day will be blessed
Yes.
and will be stronger. It's a big
Amen.
mistake not supporting and not standing with Israel.
Absolutely. And all we have to do is look at history to see what has happened to any nation that challenged Israel or attacked the Jewish people. We see that those countries do not share the same um, power that they once shared throughout history. We can look to Spain, we can look to Egypt. I mean, there's many examples in the Bible of that. Well, General Vivi, there is one more question that I have for you, and that is security related, and it's the issue of judicial reform. We've been, watching the riots that have been going on in Israel. Can you explain to our audience what is taking place? Because this seems like, I'm looking at it from the perspective of what happened with President Trump. And it appears that we see a similar battle going on in Israel, especially with the prime minister um, attacking him. But we find these people rioting in the streets, waving their Israeli flags. And, here Israel's calling for, the leaders are calling for judicial reform. And there seems to be a movement to oppose this type of reform. So, could you explain to our audience what is the issue with judicial reform, and why are there so many protesters in the street, and how does that compromise Israel's security?
Well, in the last 30 years, we've seen the Supreme Court in Israel taking to itself more and more power, which was not given to them by Israeli law,
Mm-hmm.
and creating a situation where instead of having the government and the parliament leading policy in Israel, we see the judges getting involved in more issues which are not supposed to really be involved in. And I think there is at large an understanding that there is a need to do a judicial reform which will balance back what was 30 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
Balance back to the right place, the balance between the government, the parliament, and the Supreme Court.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the judicial reform is supposed to encourage democracy and give the power to the people.
Mm-hmm.
And the people who are protesting are a small elite that wants to keep power to themselves.
Mm-hmm.
So they are pouring huge amounts of money, portraying this judicial reform as it's the end of democracy, when basically it's exactly the opposite.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I remember when I studied for my bachelor degree American history and political science, um, I read many letters that Thomas Jefferson wrote talking about the American judiciary, and he talked about judicial tyranny,
Mm-hmm.
about the tendency of the American Supreme Court at the time, 200 years ago,
Mm-hmm.
to take more and more power to themselves. So this is not really a new issue. The moment democracy was invented,
Mm-hmm.
the whole issue of where is the checks and balances between the president, the Congress, the judges has always been an issue, and it's the same. It's the same in Israel, and
Mm-hmm.
definitely the Supreme Court in Israel has changed dramatically the checks and balances, and they need to be
Mm-hmm.
changed back to something that is more democratic.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But there are people who don't really want the 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 vast majority to have the power, because in Israel the society tends to be more conservative, more religious, and people are not attached to the religion or to conservative values. They feel that the Supreme Court needs to be the dominant organization to keep their own values. So this is really what's going on.
Okay. So do you find this a threat to the security? I mean, the riots that are going on, other people being attacked in the streets because they do hold to these conservative values. They do want to see a balance of power in the Israeli Knesset this way. Do you find that this, threatens the security of Israel?
So, my organization, because we deal with national security, we are not dealing really with the judicial reform as such, but we are certainly dealing with the implications.
Right.
And the implications, there are several implications. One thing that is devastating, and we fought it really hard, is the fact that people are trying to politicize the army, encourage reserve soldiers to say that if this judicial reform will move forward, they will not serve in the army. And this is terrible, because no matter what your political views are, you don't involve the army in that. The army is what defends all of us.
Right.
Today, maybe, some guys of the left don't like the policy. Tomorrow it will be a different government. And now you will have maybe people on the right saying, you know what, if you want to push for this policy, we will not serve. It doesn't work like that.
Right.
So we are fighting really hard with my organization to keep the army outside of the political discussion. We never, ever thought about, bringing in the army to the discussion. It's something that shouldn't be done. This is one thing. The other thing is that all these riots and, discussions, they give a sense of feeling to our enemies that, the Israeli society is weakening, that they are not strong as a society, and this really encourages our enemies to attack us. And this brings the prospect of possible war. It becomes much likely that our enemies will want to attack. And on top of that, there are people who are willing to hurt our economy, hurt our international relations, lie to the world and say that, the government is promoting the end of democracy or something like that.
Yeah.
And this is devastating. I mean, I expect Israeli citizens to, each one is entitled to its own views, but keep your discussions within our country. If you want to protest, protest. But, there are red lines. You don't hurt your own economy or international relations or army because you have some political view.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because it does threaten the security of every individual.
I'll give you an example. The former government decided to build a coalition that was dependent on its existence on an Arab Muslim Brotherhood party that is anti-Zionist. For us, for my organization, this was terrible. This was completely against Jewish and Zionistic values. For us, I don't think we felt less bad than maybe somebody else about the judicial reform. But we will never hurt our country. We will never politicize the army. We don't do things like that. No. Because we are real Zionists. We are real Jews. We don't hurt our country to promote our views.
Amen.
This is something that I expect from every Jew and every Israeli and every person that considers himself a Zionist, to keep the discussion within democratic boundaries.
Absolutely.
It's okay to protest. It's not okay to riot. It's okay to protest. It's not okay to hurt your economy or politicize the army. There are red lines you don't cross.
Absolutely. You don't threaten the security of the nation and the people. And I am just amazed with your heart for Zionism, your love for Israel, your love for the land, your dedication and your commitment by even starting this organization to defend Israel's security. And we at PJTN, all of our supporters around the world, want to stand with you. So, in closing, General Avivi, are there any final comments you would like to share with our audience and how they can follow your work or get involved or support your organization?
Yes, definitely. So everybody can follow us on idsf.org.il. We have an English website and a Hebrew. We send every week information about what's going on in Israel in our newsletters. We do many webinars, and we do really, really top research and surveys. We have hundreds of generals and commanders and thousands of officers and operators. So we really share a lot of information, and we are all really, really dedicated to the land of Israel, to the people of Israel, and to our security, looking for generations. And I invite everybody to be involved, follow, and be part of this very, very important mission.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Ladies and gentlemen, that was idsf.org.il. IDSF, Israel's Defense and Security Forum. General Avivi, thank you so much for joining us again today. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope you found this program informative. It is so critically important that we hear about what's happening on the ground in Israel, and I'm so grateful for General Avivi's continued support and passion to defend the land. And we at PJTN want to stand and lift up his arms. Just like Aaron and Hur lifted up Moses' hands, he is doing holy work in defending the land. He's defending the covenant that God made with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and their descendants, the eternal covenant that doesn't end in 2023 because Iran is threatening Israel's very existence. So we're going to post this podcast on our website and all of our podcast platforms so that you can share this with your family and friends. Ladies and gentlemen, people need to hear this insider information. You're not going to hear what General Avivi just shared with us on the mainstream media because his message does not resonate with the mainstream political media machine. As PJTN Watchmen, we have a biblical mandate to stand against the ungodly rising Nazi threat that is destroying this nation and other Western nations, threatening our Judeo-Christian values and promoting anti-Semitism. We cannot remain silent. We know God warned the prophet Ezekiel about the responsibility of the watchman, that the watchman, now that you all have been enlightened, now that you've been informed, God told the prophet that if the watchman doesn't warn the inhabitants of the city when the enemy is advancing, that God will hold that watchman accountable if any innocent blood is shed. But if the watchman sounds the alarm to warn others, and they, the others, refuse to listen and heed the warning, if their blood is shed, it's required of them. So I need for you, ladies and gentlemen, this is critically important. We are living under a regime in the United States of America that does not honor we the people. The elections in 2024 are critically important because what happens in that election will determine our relationship with Israel. And this current administration is not supporting Israel. They are threatening the security through their policies. Dietrich Bonhoeffer reminded us, silence in the face of evil is itself evil. God will not hold us guiltless. Not to speak is to speak. Not to act is to act. Don't forget to join us for next week's podcast as we continue this conversation with Danny Seaman. And we're going to talk about combating the rise of anti-Semitism and taking back local control of our communities. I want to also remind you that if you have not signed up to become a PJTN Watchman, you can help support this mission through our award-winning documentaries and Focus on Israel programs, as well as more programs like this for just $20 a month. So go to our website at pjtn.org to watch our programs and listen to our past podcasts. With your generous monthly donation, you can ensure that PJTN remains on the front lines and in the headlines. But we can't do it without your faithful prayers and financial support. I hope that you will prayerfully consider supporting our mission as we educate to activate Jews, Christians, and all people of conscience to stand on the front lines of this all-encompassing war. God bless you, and thank you for all you do on behalf of our Jewish brethren, the State of Israel, and these United States. Thank you again for joining me on this edition of Proclaiming Justice. Please share this podcast with your family and friends. For more information about how you can get involved, please visit our website at pjtn.org. As a PJTN Watchman, you can help us keep up the fight to preserve our freedom for our children and their children for such a time as this.